Hey Mike, thanks
Hey,
for helping out today.
no problem. Hope you feel better soon. I'm actually uh avoiding my own spouse here because she came down with something, and I know that I have next week we have open source summit, so I'm trying my best not to get sick myself.
Yeah, I'm trying. I really am, but with the kiddos, like it's hard to not get sick. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I
Don't
appreciate you jumping in twice now.
don't worry about it. No, it's all good. Uh Let me share my screen. Do a little copy paste. Pull up that PR in a second.
Oh, and I tried when I do the preview, the markdown for that PR, the images are aligning right, but when I look at the deploy, it doesn't align anything, so I don't quite know how to do the formatting for that PR.
Yeah, I'm sure we can ask. I think Mark and some of the other folks have done done a lot of it. So, uh, and Arnaud and a bunch of folks. So yeah, I'm the same way. I have no idea how the formatting um, for, I don't know if it's like a Hugo template or whatever. I can probably give it another minute or two while we're waiting for folks. Feel free to add your attendance in the meeting notes here. One last time here. Feel free to put your attendance in the meeting notes. Gonna give it maybe just one more minute. Yeah. All right. We can probably get started here. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly after, and your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. All right. Give me 1 second to pull up some of the stuff. Okay. So feel free to also add anything to the agenda because I don't think we have a ton in here for today. I believe looking through the list here, everybody who's been on this meeting has been on this meeting before. And so no newcomers here, but I think one of the things, just some additional piece of the one of the things on the agenda for Salsa 1.0 feedback. I don't know if folks other than myself have been hearing anything from the Salsa 1.0 side. Largely, as I sort of mentioned last week a little bit, Salsa 1.0 feedback has largely been pretty good. You know, a lot of great feedback from KubeCon. Even the CNCF as an organization is definitely interested in looking at Salsa audits against CNCF projects, which was really cool. Chris Adexek had some interesting thoughts around that. Hey Jay, you have your hand up?
Yeah. I mean, I'll wait till you're done. I mean, I've gotten some feedback as well. So
yep. Okay, yeah, I'll continue on. So I think, you know, I think the big things are still kind of repeats from the last couple of weeks were Salsa 1.0 seems, you know, looks pretty good, but there's not really a lot of great 1.0 examples yet. And so things around the tooling around 1.0 could be potentially improve there. I know that there's an NPM one that's being planned, a GitHub action on that. And there's some other tools that are being built out. I know we had sort of, my company had announced an open source tool called Spectre that is, you know, doing stuff with Salsa. And so there's some stuff there, but I think we need to do a little bit more and also maybe provide some additional documentation for folks who are looking to implement, let's say, Salsa and, or sorry, implement tools for Salsa, stuff that we could do on that front to help them out. One of the other big pieces of feedback, which seemed to be a point of confusion, and I think is something that we just need to do a better job at, is a lot of folks are still very confused that they think Salsa is primarily a SaaS framework, which it isn't. It supports SaaS, which I think is a key feature, because I know a lot of frameworks just assume you are operating anything and everything yourself. And I think having that information and highlighting like Salsa can help support these other things, assuming that those infrastructure providers or service providers are attesting to, or sorry, like certifying or providing conformance to certain things. I think that's important. But I know that, you know, there's a lot of confusion on, you know, hey, I'm a small software vendor who doesn't use GitHub Actions. Can I be Salsa compliant or Salsa conformant? I think that sort of thing needs to be addressed. I think that could probably be addressed in a couple of blog articles or a little bit of documentation, kind of highlighting the different areas of Salsa and how folks can sort of provide that information. And that's I think the big things that I was hearing over the past couple of weeks. Jay?
Yeah, so I think from an end user perspective, and of course those in the developer community and some of these and some of the organizations that I've actually worked for, and of course those that people I've worked with have moved on. You know, a lot of first of all, great feedback for Salsa 1.0. Part of the headache comes in developers. You know, some of these organizations in R&D areas have their own. You know, that they've developed it with, of course, with other publications and standards, developed their own development life cycles, and they're saying, well, no, our developers are only going to follow one thing, and you know, we've developed this thing that they're following, you know, from end to end, and you know, we're unsure about something that we're going to bring in that's going to change how we do things. Part of the things that I've been echoing to them is this is not an or. This can be an and, right? And I think that it might be a good job for us to help articulate something like that. What's the and, right? So saying that, you know, through doing what you currently do, save for a few and I'll say this, being a person who's actually had to audit some of these things and also provide advisory towards some of these things and two different lives. Perhaps, by enforcing, not necessarily tweaking what you currently do, but truly enforcing what you already have in place, you can then uh attest to meeting, or attest to conforming to, or attest, to a salsa level, right? Something like that. So it's us being able to properly articulate stuff like that that might make it a hell of a lot better for a lot of these dare I say larger organizations who have their you know to say something like teaching, please forgive this, but teaching old dogs new tricks, right? Having a situation where you can have, it's an or and not necessarily an or. We have that conversation, and we put that out, and that might make a lot of the stomach rumblings a little less, right? So, but that's just some of the stuff I've been hearing, and some of the things that I've been addressing in conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think that's something that's also gone beyond just purely the salsa side as well, right? I think it's something that actually we've noticed in the CNCF with the supply chain working group that we have there, is a lot of folks are looking at a lot of the standards and frameworks that are coming out, and they say, oh, this is I use I use salsa or I use this other thing. And a lot of times, like, no, it's you're doing a lot of this other stuff. And in addition to that, I think the thing that folks often need to recognize is like, and I've worked at very, very, very large banks, for example, and one of the things there is there's a lot of confusion in some areas, but generally the way that they sort of view something like salsa is not, we are adopting salsa as our build framework or whatever, or, our build security framework. It is usually something along the lines of they have a policy that says we must adopt a community standard framework for builds. And then it's like, okay, cool. And they define sort of something at the high level of, Acme Bank, build security framework. Okay, we're going to be adopting salsa, but we also have these additional requirements. We're going to be adopting salsa for the end-to-end sort of consumption. We're going to adopt S2C2F, but we're also going to be including this because of PCI compliance, and we're going to be including this other thing. And in certain cases, they might say, hey, we do, 95% of salsa, but we can't do this thing or whatever. And I think that's kind of where a lot of these organizations are coming from. I think we just need to make sure that folks on both ends recognize that, because I know that's, for folks who haven't worked at very large enterprises, it can sometimes be a huge surprise when they find out that actually a lot of these large enterprises do adopt these other frameworks. They just don't necessarily, they're not shouting it to the world. They're just like, no, salsa is part of the Acme Bank build security policy. Like, that's just kind of how we have it set up. And I think that's kind of an important thing to maybe even get across in something like a blog article, because I know it's something that's confused a lot of folks when it comes to stuff like even like the conformance program and some of these other things, that people are looking at salsa as it's the only thing. And it's like, no, it's not the only thing. It's often a piece for a lot of organizations that say, hey, we have this specific need, and it fits that specific need. And, but we might have other things. We might have, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, for better or worse, and the reason why I bring up larger organizations, especially when they have, especially when their customers are small to medium organizations, but their customers are going to come into this, and especially if they're newer organizations, they're going to come into this saying, we need to be salsa compliant, and if we buy from you, you need to be salsa compliant, right? And I mean, that's coming. We're not there yet, but that's coming, right? And in the instance where you're like, well, we can't ask our developers to do something new, it's like, well, you don't necessarily have to do something new. You probably kill some of the exceptions to policies. If you kill, so some of these organizations, you kill some of the exceptions, you're probably right in the ballpark, right? Stuff like that. You know, and by the way, this is a lot more complex than what I'm saying, but on its face, you know, having seen what I've seen, I'm summing it up to like just these basic things. But this stuff is coming, and the pain is going to be experienced on both ends if we don't properly articulate that it can help and not hurt, or it can add to and not take away from, right? Add to positively and not take away from negatively.
So that actually, you bring up a good point there as something maybe we might want to take a look at, which is since this is no longer just purely the salsa positioning group, right? It's all of SCI. Does it make sense for us to look at like writing something like a, you know, I don't want to say a full-fledged white paper, but even just something like a summary document for folks who are looking at some of the stuff that's being built on the supply chain side that's coming out of OpenSSF, so that folks like realize that these things like these best practices and a lot of the things that are coming out of this org are not purely just like, it doesn't mean you have to adopt 100% of everything wholesale, and it doesn't have to also be the only thing you adopt either.
I'm actually on board with that. I'm not terribly sure. I'm not terribly sure what that would look like, and I guess with that, I don't want us to shoot ourselves in the foot either, because we are speaking with the government, especially with respect to the mobilization plan, and of course we have you know, our ongoing conversation about the wonderful emerging world that is the Sterling tool chain. I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot with what we're saying you have to do or don't have to do this early on. And by the way, I'm with the don't have to necessarily do part. I just don't want us to write something that pigeonholes the rest of the OpenSSF one way or the other ahead of pending conversations.
Oh yeah. No, I think it's less about that. I think it's more of even just a generic informative document, you know, it could be something for, you know, the OpenSSF blog, or, you know, like even just something, I think like 2 pages for folks to sort of, you know, because I think one of the big things has been around like confusion, both at like organizations at every level who sort of are unsure of, hey, I'm looking at adopting salsa. Does that mean I can't do this other thing? I'm looking at
Oh, so like what we're talking about, yeah, we should absolutely write something like that. I mean, one
yep.
page, but definitely stands to put something like that out there. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Mike, to second that thought, yeah, I do agree with trying to put something out. I think at one point, early on in the notes, we had kind of like a SCI working group blog about talking about the mission and the mobilization plan and how everything aligns and whatnot. So maybe we need to start that up. I know last week I wasn't there, but I think there was some talks about, you know, where do we post a blog if we wanted to for SCI working group. We didn't have rights and now we do. So maybe once we put out that first initial blog of, hey, this is our new direction, maybe we start tackling some of the more broader topics of, hey, this is how you could, right? We're not saying you need to, or we are requiring you to, but this is how OpenSSF is envisioning XYZ.
Brian?
Yeah, to build on Melva's point, but maybe even go much further than she might. That's somewhat as a provocative statement. A message of coexistence, a message of, well, there's always more than one way to do it, and you can do multiple at the same time, to the recipient might ring as a lack of confidence in the appropriateness of one's own solution. And one thing I see as both an opportunity and a threat for us is in the regulatory space in both the US and in Europe, you're starting to see calls for projects and software producers to adopt traceability, the kinds of traceability of process that Salsa is really suitable for. And it's my sincere hope that we end up with a world where all those requirements can kind of harmonize to the degree where really a Salsa delivered process and attestation system can meet those regulatory needs and allow people to do that without really lifting a finger if their tools automatically generate it, right? So a message of, well, sure, have 3 or 4 different things running at the same time moves against that. It also moves a little bit against the desire, I think, to see simplicity and kind of a way to weave Salsa and Sigstore together to be kind of the recommended practice. There's folks talking about wanting to kind of combine these pieces into something called a Sterling toolchain. And optionality comes with a cost. It's always politically nice, but it comes at some degree of operational cost. So let me just be provocative and say maybe instead we should have some confidence in our solution and put out, here's how to convert your existing home-built, hand-cooled process to Salsa, or here's how to move from this either single vendor proprietary thing to now this new open standard. I mean, like that, those kinds of messages instead. So tell me if I'm amiss or missing the boat entirely.
So I think. So I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, I think that that makes sense at some level. I think the thing that you're going to run into is there's going to be some industries like the banking industry, for example, who largely like self-regulate, and their sort of thing is they get like a high level set of regulations, something along the lines of you should be making sure that you're securing your supply chain. And what they're going to say is, hey, we're doing a bunch of different things. We're adopting Salsa here. We're doing this. Like there's going to be very little interest in saying, yep, everybody should be adopting Salsa. There's going to be a lot of interest in saying adopting Salsa as a wholesale component. There might be interest in saying like, oh yeah, a lot of folks are very interested in adopting Salsa as part of, it's kind of this thing of like in the banking space, which it's even if it's the same thing practically, from a political standpoint, they are like saying, no, what we have adopted is the Acme Bank supply chain standard. And the Acme Bank supply chain standard includes this, we adopted this FIPS, encryption standard. We adopted, Salsa. We adopted this. We adopted that. That's kind of the way that it kind of always ends up getting communicated, even if practically it's the same sort of thing. There's a lot of, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. There's a lot of like, nobody wants to just sort of come out and say, we're adopting NIST 853 as our control catalog. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that I take years to unpack. Jay, sorry.
Yeah, so I was trying to find the security framework that most financial institutions, I can't remember, FDITC, FDID, I can't remember. But the financial sector, healthcare sector, payments, these very heavily regulated industries that have gotten down how they develop tools with respect to privacy. No, it's not. Well, there's PCI, there's HIPAA, but there's the other one from the financial sector, Mel. I know somebody. FD. It's something. It begins with an F. The first letter is an F in this. And I can't remember what the hell it is, but it's the security framework that you're supposed to use to as a way to report whether or not you're meeting certain security controls in the financial sector. And I can't remember what it is. Anyway, these industries and the people that build tools and services and everything else have developed their development life cycles such that they can continue to meet and then scale according to regulatory compliance. That being the case, and as I said before, salsa can be an and to this situation. I would be very careful to tell them, move all of the way you do things over to salsa and signing with Sigstore. I'd be very careful with that. I would rather say you can do what you do and then meet these levels by perhaps, adding this control or adding this, not necessarily saying move over, because that creates a whole can of worms that you're going to get pushed back, or you're going to get straight up not that one, Mike. You're going to get confused. You're going to get probably a complete, like, I don't want to do it, or I'm not going to do it because I'm fine on this side because I meet my regulatory compliance, right? You're going to run into a situation where they're going to be like, no, that's too much, rather than saying it's an and then maybe saying, oh, okay, well, I can do that too, right?
Yeah, and I think with that said, to a little bit of Brian's point, and this is something that also John Meadows over at Citi, when we were talking about Sterling Toolchain, had a lot of really good thoughts, which is just for small to medium businesses, it's a much easier sell because you can say, a lot of the smaller to medium businesses are a lot more flexible, right? They don't have, legacy processes and a lot of these things, right? Like, I've worked at a couple of banks where, the legacy processes were decades old, and getting some of that to change to something new completely wholesale was going to be like moving a mountain. But for a lot of small to medium businesses, it's a lot easier. And also, as part of something like a Sterling Toolchain, it's a much easier sell to say, hey, you're a startup, you're just starting. Start signing with Sigstore, start doing salsa, start adopting, when you ingest software, make sure that you're following the S2C2F practices. That's a much easier sort of sell compared to, let's say, your giant banks, your JPMCs, your cities, which, to be frank, are going to hire they're going to hire an Accenture, an IBM, a giant sort of firm to help build out something that meets their needs, compared to, let's say, a smaller organization that's going to say, hey, we don't have that sort of money, and we don't necessarily need that because we could be a bit more flexible. Let's just adopt a Sterling Toolchain. Let's just adopt some of those things.
All reasonable answers. I'm just doing my job to be provocative. But also, I know that humility sells well in open source, but may not be the power that we believe it is when in this next phase, to drive this next phase of adoption. I really liked reading about GitHub's adoption of Salsa and Sigstore for NPM provenance. And that's a story I would love to see repeated across all the major language ecosystems. And perhaps even demonstrable provenance cross language ecosystem for the, what is the vast majority of apps, which are combinations of lots of different languages, right? Yeah, I want more of that, and I want a bit of swagger to come out of this community, to be proud of kind of what we built, and highlight, recognize those companies that are building it to us, rather than just adding us as a hey, we also support kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, on that front, yeah, I definitely totally agree with you. And I think that there's a lot of ways for us to do that in that space. And I think we're starting to see a lot of this already. And I saw even at KubeCon, a lot of folks interested on this. Like, there a lot of folks are very interested in adopting Salsa and making it very public that they've adopted Salsa. I think the things there is, I think, and this is kind of something, both it's a problem that this group has, and it's a problem that we can't necessarily do ourselves, like the positioning group can't. I think the tooling groups within OpenSSF can, which is just, hey, it's hard to adopt salsa if there is, like, as an example, there's no, there's not really a lot of salsa tools for Rust, for example. I'm writing up some personally and it's open source, but hey, there's some stuff that needs to happen on that end as well. And if we can start to kind of figure out how we start to address some of those as well, I think that would be super helpful, because I know one of the like I said before, like some of the biggest feedback we've gotten is we have stuff like CNCF is doing salsa audits, but the salsa audits right now were like highly manual. It was like looking at somebody's build process, but over time, what we'd love to see is like, hey, you're using a lot of these, OpenSSF standardized tools for these different ecosystems, and that should be good enough to hit for most folks. I think that kind of thing is something that we also want to push, but we just it's unclear here of the desire on the OpenSSF end, or the resourcing on the OpenSSF end to maybe build some of that out.
Well, our desire is to support all of you, and support our members, and support what the open source ecosystem needs, and where that can match up with regulatory changes and where the markets are heading. So much the better, right? Skate to where the puck is going. So you tell us what you need, and I just want to encourage you to be bold.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. Is there anything else on that front? Otherwise, we can move over to the salsa build versus source blog stuff. Cool. So I don't want to. I know Melba's voice is. I don't want to hurt her voice anymore. But Melba and Chris put out a salsa blog. There's a PR open for it. Overall, looks pretty good. I think there's a couple of things that we just want to clear up in here, or at least from my opinion. But overall, I think the purpose of the blog, for folks who haven't read through it yet, was to sort of why we separated out build and source. And there's a couple of different reasons, but some of the primary reasons are to allow for the separation of concerns between different teams, groups, companies, right? I could use, let's say, GitHub as my source provider, but have an internal build system, or vice versa, right? Where I could have an internal build source code system, but be calling out to a SaaS for running my build. The way that without having these build tracks, without separating these tracks, we have that problem of, well, if I include two-person code review, well, if I'm using, let's say, Bitbucket for two-person code review, and I'm using GitHub Actions for my build, GitHub Actions can't produce the full salsa attestation. So that's kind of, I think that's actually a very, very good point that hasn't really been highlighted in a lot of the other stuff we've released, is that, like, we want to make it separate for a couple of different reasons. One is just from a practical standpoint of us building the rules. It's often easier for us to say, here's the build set of rules, you can focus on that. Oh, here's the source set of rules, you can focus on that. The dependency set, or whatever, right? Like the source and build set of rules. And then, integrate with also stuff like the S2C2F consumption side, right? Where you can say, and all of those pieces together kind of build out, different things can be responsible for those different pieces. It doesn't have to be one single team having to build everything from scratch, which I think is hugely valuable here. I think we just want to make sure, we want to clarify a couple of things. One is, I think it's really key to highlight that the build and similar sorts of things can be part of one particular team, could be responsible for it, one particular department, and different departments might have different build systems, whatever. Or you might have outsourced it to a completely, different SaaS. And that's what makes Salsa super useful here, is you don't need to have one individual thing manage the whole thing, which is huge. I think we just need to, based on some of the feedback I got from KubeCon, is we just need to really make sure that folks recognize that it's not just SaaS, right? It's not just, GCB or GitHub Actions or GitLab CI that can do this. You can do this internally. It comes with its own set of risks as well, right? By doing it internally versus externally, and certain folks maybe want to do something more rigorous internally. I think those sorts of things just need to be clarified. But overall, I really liked it, and I suggest everybody here should read it because it was enjoyable, and there was even things I hadn't considered, and I've been doing a lot of work on Salsa for a while. Cool. Cool. The other thing, actually, before I forget, and this is not, we don't have to answer this the second, but I know that we've been talking about roadmap communication and how we're going to be. I know we're still sort of trying to finalize a couple of things. I know that a lot of the folks are very much roaring and ready to go to like push Salsa 4, right? Like I know we pulled out Salsa 4, a lot of things, on that end. I think this group can maybe do to, once we kind of sort that out. I know one of the things that was discussed a little bit yesterday was, okay, cool, how do we kind of, let's say we have like 2 or 3 bodies of work that we're going to be focused on from the Salsa side, at least. How do we communicate that out to everybody? And I think that might be something that we want to think about, because one of the things that was also brought up as a piece of feedback is a lot of folks were not aware of a lot of the work that was going on in the Salsa side that led to 1.0. And so what can we do to kind of just generally, whether it's like a monthly like update to the drafts and some of those things. So Melda asks, can we put the roadmap on the site with a follow-up blog? Yeah, I mean, I think that seems fairly reasonable to me. Jay, anybody else?
Reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I think even I like that suggestion. And I think also something like even if we don't obviously release a new version of Salsa every month, having something like a monthly update on, just the high level items that we're focused on might also prove to be useful, so that folks get an idea of, hey, we didn't find much interest in this thing, so we're going to be pushing that back to later. And if somebody comes in and, all of a sudden 4 people like see it on the internet and they all come into the next meeting, they go, no, please don't drop it. Then we know, because like that was actually, a bit of a surprise to us when a few folks had come up and they're like, hey, you took out the minimum requirements for the build system and you did this. I really wanted that. And I wanted, and it's like, okay. It's good to know. Yeah.
I think a pivot from a 1.0 to thinking about like what is the next 18 months or 24 months looks like is a great opportunity to grow the contributor community. It's a great chance to be able to say, 1.0 is out, look at us, we can accomplish a thing, we can actually come to consensus and put a flag in the ground. Woo, yes. And now we're thinking about applying this to source systems and I mean all these other kind of angles, but we need your help and we need your engagement. And those of you who have started to pick up Salsa, you are stakeholders in this. And here's a place to come on and come in and tell us what you like, but understand that we're going to gravitate towards the duocracy, right? We're going to gravitate towards those showing up not just to say I want a pony, but those actually there to manifest the pony with all the other people who want a pony. So and the right format for that might be very different than a call, like telling people to show up to a call like this, at the hour of their choosing, because this can be a little bit too cozy. But instead to have like a webinar or have like something that feels a little bit more like a publicly promoted event and say, come co-design the future with us. And by the way, that does take persistence. It does take some commitment. So if you can give us an hour every 2 weeks, and meaning, if you can meaningfully contribute to bringing your expertise and background and encoding that in the Salsa 2.0 document or 1.5 or whatever you want to label it, then please, now is the time. Now is the time to join. Is kind of that call to action that then Jennifer and I can make hay out of and get to a broader audience.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion. I really like that term duocracy. Yeah, I know that's one of the things that we've been really trying to push very, very, very hard, is like, hey, like at the end of the day, we could have a once every 3 months, summit where we sit down and do these things, or we could have these multiple meetings and sit down and also have stuff offline where folks are just opening up PRs to fix things and so on. And at the end of the day, even if somebody has a great idea, if a great idea isn't actioned on, it's just an idea, which is something that I know that it has worked really well for Salsa. And a lot of the stuff that actually is coming out of the OpenSSF has been that it's not just purely about let's sit around and debate the exact best way of approaching the problem. Let's start doing it, and we're gonna stumble a little bit, but at the end of the day, having something good. What's the term? Perfect is the enemy of the good, or whatever. It's better to have something good now than to have something perfect never.
I've got a better one for you. Worse is better. There's a great essay, some of you might know, by Dick Gabriel, who is a researcher at Sun for a while, and he wrote this great essay called "Worse is Better." In software, it's better to start with a minimal creation that's a little bit wrong. Here, I'll drop the link to it, so as to trigger folks to jump in and help you fix it, and for it to feel approachable and human, rather than totally polished and thus unassailable. And it's why the Wikipedia grew. It's why open source works, frankly. And anyways, he puts it much better than I can. But I think it also helps explain why we have so many bad protocols that seem to survive for so long. Is they only have to be good enough.
Yes.
And anyone holding off forever to solve the forever problem is going to be what's his name, who wrote Xanadu, the web takeover, and he was pissed about that, but he waited too long.
Yeah. But yeah, that's good. I think that's also super useful because, like, definitely. Anyway, never mind. I'm okay. But yeah, that's great. Yeah. Cool. Are there any other topics around this? Anything else? Oh, yes. We're going to be canceling next week's meeting because I believe most of us on this call will be at Open Source Summit. Yes, we have. I have a talk and as well as a panel along with the folks on this call. I'm looking forward to that. Also looking forward to seeing all of you or most of you at least. I don't know who else, if anybody's not coming, but in person, that'll be great. And also looking forward to chat through some stuff. I know definitely have some open questions still about some of the stuff that's going on with Sterling Toolchain, and if there's anything this group can do, or just even me personally, to help push some of those things, because I think that Sterling Toolchain idea is great, especially for in the open source space. A lot of folks are starting to ask like the question of like, hey, I run an open source project. I want to do the right things, but hey, I'm just a volunteer. What can I be doing? What can I be adopting Are there any scripts? Are there any nice little applications that will do a lot of the work for me, like something like OpenSSF scorecard and All-Star and those things? I know folks are looking for a lot of that, and if there's things that this group can do to help communicate that, help provide feedback, I know we're very interested there. Cool. If there's nothing else, we can end 15 minutes early, and I'll see at least most of you next week in person in Vancouver.
Okay, see you guys next week.
Thanks, Mike.
Cool.
Thanks, Mike. And everyone.
Later.